Greetings. I feel like it's September. I've got this blanket on me. I've got these socks, and I am freezing. Cold, y'all. And it's like the end of June, and it's still cold over here. Greetings. Welcome. Today we're going to be talking about boundary setting. I feel like it's a conversation that we can never have enough of because it's still a pain point for folks. And so I just want to talk, just unpack that a little bit. Hopefully give you some tips that can help you on your path to setting some boundaries, better boundaries, healthier boundaries, because they need to be set. They really do. Let's see, let's wait for some folks to come in. So why it's so important to have this conversation is because it's, again, hard for people to set boundaries. And so what we're going to do is talk about why it's so hard, what gets in the way, how we can get better at it, and some things to kind of like pay attention to as you're going through the process of setting boundaries, because boundaries are so important. They're more than just kind of like saying what you do and don't want. Boundaries is about safety and security. And so when you're not setting boundaries, you're jeopardizing your safety and not providing yourself with a sense of security. And when you don't set boundaries, it really just wreaks havoc on your relationships. It also drains your energy when you're not setting the boundaries. So it goes a lot deeper than just your needs. And you find yourself showing up as somebody that you're not, right? So again, it's crucial to set boundaries because what you find is that like it's important for you to know where a relationship begins and where it ends on both ends. And what I find that is like when you start setting boundaries, sometimes people appreciate it. And often they don't know how to articulate that appreciation. But sometimes people don't realize what they're doing until you set that boundary. When you make it clear for them, then they can adjust themselves in ways that they probably didn't realize that they could. So 100% the boundaries are for you, but they're also for other people, right? And boundaries are also crucial because I know you've probably heard this before from Maya Angelou, like we teach people how to treat us. If we don't set those boundaries and somebody violates a boundary, then we're going to get upset about that. But we didn't set it. And I think what makes this really hard for folks is because they usually don't know what their boundaries are. And if you don't know what those boundaries are, then it's like taking some time and doing a self-audit to figure out what that is, right? And you could tell when your boundaries being violated if there's like this you're saying yes to something that's out of alignment that makes you can feel it in your body if you take a second to check in, and your body's going to kind of reject whatever it is you might be saying yes to or saying no to. Your body will sense it, and you'll sense that out of alignment, and you'll also have that immediate, I don't like the word regret, but you'll have that immediate regret afterwards. And so when we start to just pay attention to ourselves, it will give us the feedback that we need to navigate some of this stuff. So if you don't know, if you're not clear about what your boundaries are, pay attention to your body language, pay attention to how you feel afterwards. That's a key indicator of whether or not that is something you value or don't value. And so boundaries also help us to protect our time, energy, and space. So crucial. Because if you don't do that, then what is going to happen is like, especially in the beginning when you're establishing new relationships, if you don't set a precedent or framework for that new relationship, then that person's going to go off of that original framework. And sometimes it's going to be really hard to get off that framework if you've already presented yourself in a specific way. And so to backpedal can be exhausting. So that's why boundaries are so crucial, because you set this whole thing up, then you don't want to do it. You spent the energy complaining about the boundary that you set, right? Because you're like, damn, why did I say yes to that? So Now you're using their energy against the boundary, against what you said yes to. And then you go through the process of whatever you committed yourself to, hating every step of the way, right? Really just out of alignment with every step of the way. And it becomes really exhausting. So when you implement that boundary up front, you conserve so much energy and time. And what I've noticed is that people will respect that. They will get to know you as the person that has that specific boundary. I used to have this friend in college, and she was a Sagittarius. And I don't know if you know too much about Sagittarius, but if they don't want to do something, they ain't going to do it. And so I remember when, so if you just join us, we're just talking about boundaries. I remember we used to always ask her, come on, let's go here, let's go there. You know, it's college days, you know, people want to party it up. But if she didn't feel like it, she just said no. And sometimes when we say no, we want to explain ourselves and say why we say no so that we can sort of ease our own personal anxieties. And we don't need to provide an explanation for why we're saying no. And we'd be like, well, why not? And she'd be like, because I don't want to. And that was it. But she did it enough that we just knew that was her boundary. And so she basically trained us to not ask her that question. Like, we just knew that she was just not going to be down for it. So we just avoided it. But did that damage our relationship? No, thankfully, right, at that time. And so when you start setting those boundaries, you will be known as that person who says yes to specific things and says no to specific things. And it's very clear. And once it's clear, it won't be crossed, but you need to just remain consistent. And what makes it very hard about setting a lot of these boundaries, and I don't want you to beat yourself up about it, it goes back to just child stuff. So I think about like inner child wounding. And, you know, if you ever have taken my inner child healing course, we really go deep into some of these things. And so the way that you were raised will impact how you set or don't set boundaries as an adult. Because what happens is, for a lot of folks who have grown up in really traumatic childhoods, sometimes you didn't know how to set boundaries because your caregivers, your parents, didn't set them for themselves, didn't have any boundaries, or had really rigid boundaries. And so you didn't get to see what a healthy boundary setting looked like. So it wasn't modeled for you. So if it wasn't modeled for you, you won't know how to do it, right? So you sort of have to teach yourself as an adult how to set healthy boundaries. And what happens is often, sometimes in, you know, chaotic childhoods, those relationships were, some of those boundaries were either ambiguous, so you didn't know like who was in charge, right? You're like, wait, am I in charge? Who's in charge? And when you don't know who's in charge, that really affects your sense of safety and security, right? And then if you have to take a role as the parent, that also impacts your boundaries later on. Or you might have found that like those boundaries are enmeshed, right? Like it wasn't very clear again. And so there wasn't really clearly defined family structures, right? Even for me growing up, I knew who was in charge, but it was very rigid because I grew up in a very critical household. And so there was very specific and clear things that I could not do, but it was at a detriment to my own comfort as a child. Like I was always nervous or scared because my aunt was just like, right? So if we had too much lax of boundaries, we sort of just kind of was aloof. If we had very rigid boundaries, it kind of made us tense, right? So as you are in this season of your life, it's like, okay, how do I find and maintain a healthy balance with my boundaries that it doesn't alienate people, and I could articulate my boundaries in ways that doesn't turn people off, because there are ways that you can articulate them and say it in a way that people can actually receive it. And there are going to be times when people don't receive it, and that's totally fine, because that's not your stuff to take on, right? That's their stuff that they need to sort of work through. So you don't need to take that on, but you need to sort of honor yourself and your capacity. And so when you don't set them, like I said, what happens is that we simmer. Like, I'm a recovering people pleaser. I used to overextend myself to the point of like, oh my God, I used to just constantly have regrets. Like I should have just said no. I've taken on too many responsibilities, too many projects. So I was always in a constant state of overextension. And I have to be very mindful about that now. And so what I've done is I'll think about it. But I know if I say I'll think about it, it's a no. So I'm leaning into either saying, let me get back to you. And sometimes that gives you a bit of time to get comfortable with the idea of saying no, or it gives you time to sort of process what it is that you're agreeing or not agreeing to. So when you just say, hey, let me just get back to you, that gives you that time, right? So that you're not immediately saying yes and immediately saying no. And also gives the person, lets the person know that, I can just wait a little bit to get an answer. And so it works for both parties, right? And sometimes we don't say something, we get really passive aggressive about things, and that leaves the other person feeling very anxious, right? If you don't ever come back to the table about a certain thing. And so often what makes it so hard to set these boundaries is that we're just afraid. It can be a very uncomfortable conversation to have when you're wanting to, I don't like to say confront. I had this coach who used to say, it's just a clarifying conversation. It's just a clarifying conversation. And so when you think about addressing some of these things, say to yourself, I'm just having a clarifying conversation. Because what happens with boundary setting, the reason why it's so hard to be consistent about it is because most people, including myself, struggle with the discomfort of setting those boundaries. When you set a boundary, you have to be able to sit with that boundary for as long as you can. And you typically have to set it and set it over and over again. It's almost like there's this thing in advertising that says usually sometimes people have to see something about 7 or 8 times before they make a purchase. So if you think about teaching somebody how to treat you and teaching someone how to respect your values and respect your boundaries, it's something that you're going to have to do over and over and over again. And regardless how that person reacts or responds, you have to learn how to sit in that discomfort of their reaction. And that's usually what happens when people tend to give in. They're like, oh, forget it, fine, I'll do it. Or I'm just going to, go back to them and tell them I'll just say yes, or whatever it is. So I encourage you to sit in that discomfort, because what you're going to find is the more that you do, because all this is just muscle, all we're doing is building our resilience. And so the more that you do it, by the 7th or 8th time that you do it, you feel more empowered. And so we don't usually give ourselves the amount of time that we need to feel that empowerment, to feel that resilience. So just hang in there, just hang in there, and you will see the change. I guarantee it, you'll see the change, because what happens when you set a boundary, that person either falls off and you're like, ooh, because they didn't need to be a part of your life if they're not going to respect your boundary, right? Or that person adjusts. They're like, oh, okay. Because they start thinking well, damn, I don't want to make that person feel that way, right? So then there's a shared empathy that happens there. So just hold on to it. And the right people, you'll create the right circumstances and the right kind of relationships that you need that's going to honor those boundaries, right? And what I was saying earlier is if you don't set them, you simmer. You will get annoyed. You will get resentful. You will get angry. And that anger, all it's saying to you, the 2 questions that the anger is asking is what needs to be protected and what needs to be restored. So as you're setting those boundaries, that's what is important to keep at the forefront. As scary it might feel inside, what you're really saying is what needs to be protected, what needs to be restored. So keep that in mind. And so to set, let me see, somebody's saying something around. What's going on, Camilla? Yeah. Yes, setting boundaries, let me just read out loud. She says, setting boundaries, you're setting some boundaries at the moment and it's making you physically run down and unwell. It's crazy. Yep, it will. It will do that. And it will do that quite a few times until your body feels at peace with it. And the reason that we feel that is because like there's this guilt, right? We're feeling, what's going on, Danielle? A long time. We're feeling like this guilt that we can't seem to run away from. You know what I'm saying? But we can if we just hold on, because your body's going to have that adverse reaction, because your body's literally, it feels like it's in, it's, you know, because you've got to think about it through your nervous system. And so you're almost like in freeze state. You're in flight because you just want to like get away from it all. And what you're doing with setting boundaries is that you're really retraining your nervous system to get accustomed to doing those kinds of things. And so, yeah, she says, I'm exhausted from not. I'm telling you, not setting boundaries brings a whole set of problems. I can't share it now because we're getting ready for something here at the house. And I'm noticing it. I love my cousin, but I'm noticing it. She's overextending herself. And the boundaries weren't clear up front. And when the boundaries aren't clear up front, you're going to find yourself just totally exhausted and backpedaling and trying to make up for the thing that you didn't want to do in the first place, or the thing that got out of hand that you said yes to, but you didn't put any clearly defined roles. And so it actually makes you more exhausted. So it's so much better. It's almost like when you're ripping off the Band-Aid. You can rip it off real slowly and feel every bit of pain, or you can just and rip it off. That's what boundary setting is. Set it up front, be consistent, and watch you pour back into your own time, space, and energy. And so remember that all boundary setting is just about a healthy way of you building your sense of autonomy, your sense of safety, and your dignity. You're basically letting people know this is what I can and cannot do. And people just need to respect that. And whether they do or don't, that's on them. Because what happens is let me start this. The best way to practice some of this, because usually what I find is if you have a hard time setting boundaries, is because you actually have a hard time setting internal boundaries. Because boundaries start first with the internal self, you. Once you're able to set boundaries with yourself, you can then take it outwards. Once you strengthen that, you'll feel a lot stronger to be able to set external boundaries. And what do I mean by internal boundaries? Internal boundaries is sort of like the little promises that you make to yourself. That's how you really build it. The little promises you make for yourself. If you say that you're going to, like, for example, take yourself for a walk, take yourself for a walk. If you say that you're going to, what's going on, D-Line? If you say that you're going to go and, get up a little bit early to write in your journal, it's those little small boundaries that you put within yourself to sort of create a better quality of life. Those little promises are going to help you exercise stronger external boundaries. But if you're not, creating boundaries with yourself and creating a stronger sense of trust and a stronger sense of self, then it's literally, you're going to be like on a hamster wheel, exhausting yourself by trying to keep up with those external boundaries. And so if you aren't able to honor your own boundaries, there is absolutely no way people are going to honor them for you. They're just not. If they see how you are with yourself, it creates a sense of vulnerability. Oh, she always does that. Oh, just let so-and-so do that. She'll take care of it. Then people are offering up your gifts, your talents, your capacity. They start to offer you your capacity. You know what I'm saying? And so you start to set this precedent and you become the person that does this thing. And so you really want to begin to move away from that by being consistent and setting your boundaries. And what happens is that, you may have to deprive some people of your time, your energy, and your space. But often that is what they need. That is what they need. Let's see what else is in the chat. Let me see. Yeah, that resentfulness, it's not fun. It's just too exhausting for the body. The boundaries come with yourself first. If they're not strengthened within yourself, they're just going to be so much harder. What else are we going to talk about? I had some bullet points here. Let's see. All right, so the honest truth about like setting boundaries is like moving away from that fear. They're not gonna like me. They're gonna be mad at me. They're gonna think of me a certain way. But the honest truth is that you need to prioritize. You need to stop prioritizing your perception of them over yourself, right? So your perception of how those people, whomever is going to respond, does not take priority over your own capacity. So let them handle that for themselves. And we have to move past that fear of setting it. Even if you got to cringe, if you got to practice with somebody else, if you have a friend that you trust, practice setting that boundary, role play, practice saying it out loud, practice saying it in the mirror, write it down in a journal, but get used to using empowering language, right? Not the kind of language that makes you feel a bit like, I'm basically making myself small so that I can meet other people's needs. Because then that becomes a habit and then it becomes a way of life. And we don't want that, right? And so again, a boundary is there to create a limit so you can place on other people's behaviors, both on yourself and other people. And also it's a way for you to communicate what is acceptable and what is not. So keep that in mind. I've definitely done that. Sometimes boundaries can be really extreme, especially when we're starting to like figure out what it is that I need, what it is I don't need. Sometimes you really have to cut people off until you sort of figure it out. And of course, there are some consequences to that, right? Not consequences in a bad way, but there is an effect, a cause and effect to all of this. When I bought my one-way ticket to Thailand, I lost a lot of friendships when I did that because I was in such a really weird, dark place. But I just needed to get away from the noise and get away from other people's expectations. And, I had a hard time, setting the boundaries, and I felt like I was losing myself, and I just kind of left without actually having like adult conversations because I just didn't know how to articulate it at the time. But that space gave me enough time to really develop the skill sets that I needed to be able to articulate my boundaries, to be able to really get to know what it is that I really needed, to get to know what I need to do less of. And especially if you're a people pleaser, that space, you need that space. And also take the time to just love on yourself, because a lot of it comes from a lack of self-worth, And once we connect with our own worth, then we're unstoppable in that sense, right? You shift the frequency once you begin to set those boundaries, because then those kinds of people who do take advantage will not be attracted to your frequency anymore. If you find people who are taking advantage, and sometimes they're not doing it consciously, right? But if you find that happening, it's because there's this leak, right? There's this leak in your frequency that is attracting them to you. And you will find people who are going to not necessarily consciously dim that side of yourself. And so it's so crucial to really get that taken care of, even before you sort of, go out there into the real world and start dealing with relationships. And, romantic relationships will show you this like 110%, I love relationships for that. They're so good mirrors to show you the things that you need to work on, specifically boundaries, right? And so it's helpful for you to set those boundaries because, again, if you're pouring into something that you said yes to that you really didn't want to do, you're not even really giving your best self, right? Because it's almost like, hey, can I get a glass of water? And I give you a glass of water and it's murky, right? It's not even clean. So whatever you're pouring into that you said yes to, that you didn't want to say yes to, it's not even 100% like the best version of yourself. Wouldn't you rather say yes to somebody, to something that is getting all of you versus that resentful part of yourself, right? And so we may resist to set these boundaries, but there's so much more that goes into it, and it's so much deeper than what we can imagine. Because when your boundaries are clear, you can literally remain fully connected to your authentic self. You ain't got to wear no masks. Those masks come off, right? You can just be you. You can show up as you. And hey, Samaya, I'm almost done. But yeah, you can really literally show up as yourself when you set those boundaries. You don't have to, a lot of people who they talk about like code switching. I got to be this way here and this way. No, you don't. You really don't. I don't believe in that. I think code switching is for people who are too much in their armor. They're too much in their armor. And that armor has got to come off, right? Because what happens is that we can put people in such specific boundaries that we think that we're like, our boundaries become so rigid, but they're just a form of self-protection because we don't want to get hurt. It's not coming from a healthy place. So you have to ensure that like your boundaries are coming from a healthy place and not a wounded place. All right. And you always hear people say, I feel like this is why we have such a cancel culture. Because people are like, oh, I ain't messing with that person, or I'm done with that. That's not necessarily boundaries. That's like a vulnerability thing going on, right? Like you might be struggling with really being vulnerable with other people versus setting boundaries. So one of the things to keep in mind is, am I setting this boundary from a healthy place, from a very balanced place? A balanced place meaning that I'm very connected to myself versus a wounded place because I'm scared, I'm fearful, or I'm afraid of something, So just be very mindful of where and how you're setting those boundaries. Okay, I hope that was helpful. That's all I got. I'll be back tomorrow. Not sure what time. As an introvert, sometimes I got to gear myself up to do these lives. Imposter syndrome. Oh, my God. Oh, maybe I'll do a live on that. I'll do a live on imposter syndrome. I love talking about that. So thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. And hopefully I'll see y'all tomorrow and we'll keep the conversation going. And I'll see y'all next time. Thank you for participating. Peace out.